Hey, what's up, guys? This is Mark. Back to talk about fantasy football again. So, in the last video that I just posted, I talked about the fantasy impacts of free agency on the quarterback position. So now I'm going to get into the running backs and basically the effects of that. Some of these players and their stock, I think, going into next season based on some of the moves that have happened so far. So, first of all, I kind of want to pose a question just to well, not really a question, but just something to think about for a point of discussion going into the season. So with the coronavirus situation, there's a lot of concerns of whether or not the season is actually going to end up starting on time and what that timeline will look like. So under the assumption that it's going to take a little while to hopefully the season does start on time, but I think that a likely scenario that might happen because of it is there might be a situation where off-season training activities and practices and stuff like that might get canceled. So teams that are newly developing and don't like a lot of changes this off-season, haven't really gotten a lot of time to get used to each other, they might struggle initially to kind of get on the same page, and their numbers might not be as good. So keep that in mind with some of the stuff going on in the news with the coronavirus and how it might affect the NFL. This is another reason to be cautious about the Buccaneers hype, because I think that it'll take time for those players to really kind of get to know their quarterback, kind of gel under the new system. So there might be an impact with the fantasy numbers going into that. So keep that in mind. Just based on these off-season moves. So anyway, but for the running backs, so there hasn't really been a whole lot of running back changes so far. There are a few ones that I'll hit on, but why there really isn't a whole lot of running back free agency decisions and action so far is in reality, well, it is partially based on coronavirus. I think that definitely has an impact on running backs being available and changing teams. But the other thing is that teams will generally try to go for younger running backs to replace fantasy production. So that is primarily where you're going to find new running backs is through the draft. You're not going to find that in free agent scenarios. But there are some big ones to talk about, and I think that will be important for this video. But keep in mind that like in the draft, that's where you're going to get your running back gold mines from new players. But yeah, and so let's get into the moves that have happened so far. So one of the bigger moves is Melvin Gordon. He had a contract holdout last year. He wanted to get paid a giant contract similar to Todd Gurley, who I'm going to talk about in a bit. That didn't work out for him. He kind of had a down year. And then sure enough, the Denver Broncos signed him to a contract, and I had no idea why they did that. Like, there's this it's not good for Melvin Gordon because he's got to compete with Royce Freeman and Philip Lindsay now. It's not really good for the Broncos either because you already had Philip Lindsay, who was pretty productive anyway. You need I think John Elway said that like we're trying to get more touchdowns or something like that, so that's why he picked up Melvin Gordon. But like you already got a position that is managed like that. Like you already have like a goal line back in Royce Freeman, and then a speed back for PPR purposes in Philip Lindsay. So I used to live in Denver for a little bit, and I just if John Elway didn't get Peyton Manning to come to Denver, he'd be long fired by now. Like so many bad decisions, like Trevor Siemian, like keeping him as long as he has, Paxton Lynch, Vance Joseph as the coach. Like there's this year after year, like just spending money in the wrong places. This is, I think, going to be another example of that. So I don't like this move at all. Like even last year in the running backs, for running back production in Denver, it was pretty poor. There were a lot of times where you were let down by Philip Lindsay. Royce Freeman, you never really knew what you were going to get with him anyway. But then, so like, what's Melvin Gordon going to do to those guys? They might cut Royce Freeman for all I know, but I think that what would likely happen is it's just going to turn into some three-headed mess where, honestly, I don't really want a part of any of these guys. I don't know. I mean, I imagine Melvin Gordon would be the RB1, but is Philip Lindsay going to catch all his passes? It's just, I would just stay away from this. I think this is bad for Melvin Gordon's stock, and it's definitely bad for Philip Lindsay and Royce Freeman too. So, yeah. But with every loss, with every free agent that goes to the new team, you got to look at the team that lost him. And for the Los Angeles Chargers, if you didn't already know Austin Eckler, like, he's about to explode this year, especially in PPR purposes. He already had an amazing year last year. It was a huge sleeper that you got in the middle of the draft. And then now he's really doesn't have a whole lot of competition there. He's going to basically get the lead touches. But so I am very high on Austin Eckler, especially in PPR. But keep in mind, this is an excellent. The Chargers are a team that I could see picking up a rookie running back in the middle of the draft, and that guy could maybe come in and steal some of the touches from Austin Eckler, kind of be more of that physical presence at the goal line. They didn't generally use a goal line running back like that. I thought they would with Eckler being more of the scat back, but that didn't really happen. But just keep in mind, they might actually go in that direction in the draft, so pay attention to what happens next week. Another big move that happened, Todd Gurley, cut by the Rams. He's really, the last 15, 16 months for this guy has been a total just collapse for him. It's kind of unfortunate. But he got cut by the Rams and then signed by his hometown Atlanta Falcons. So now he's the Falcons' lead running back. Falcons cut Devontae Freeman. He is still unsigned. So let's look at the impact on the Falcons and the Rams. So I do like this move for Atlanta. So Atlanta, what they're gonna have, they have great passing options. Julio Jones, Calvin Ridley. I think that they're gonna be able to spread the field and possibly open it up for Todd Gurley to be able to do his thing. Todd Gurley has also had more time to rest, so there's possible that he could, be more recovered. But this is a guy that is definitely going to be a boom or bust situation. I think that a lot of people are down on him. He is probably, I would guess, would go in the third round of most drafts. So if you're in a position where you get a clear-cut RB1 like Christian McCaffrey, Dalvin Cook, Saquon Barkley, something like that with your first pick, and then going into round 3, if you want another running back who you can hit a home run with, Todd Gurley could be a good one. But just understand that there's a lot of risks there. Really have to pay attention to injury reports this offseason and see how he's doing. But this is a great situation for him because the only other running backs he's got on the roster with him right now are Ito Smith, who's been pretty much garbage, and then Brian Hill, who had a lot of opportunity but really didn't do a lot with it at the end of last season. So, Los Angeles Rams. So, the Rams, their fantasy outlook over the last year and a half has really plummeted. But I think that for them, right now they're looking at Malcolm. Right now they got Malcolm Brown and Darrell Henderson, who's the guy that they drafted last year. I thought Darrell Henderson would have more of a role this past year, but that didn't really happen. But this is a team that I would imagine goes to the draft potentially to get a running back. So keep an eye on that because Darrell Henderson, even if they're not going to feature him, he's like 5'7" or 5'8" or something. I have a hard time seeing him automatically stepping into the lead back role. And Malcolm Brown is generally an average kind of player who has some great games time to time, but is generally not going to be consistent. So keep an eye on what this team does in the draft next week. Another big move. So we all know the DeAndre Hopkins trade to the Texans. I talked about it a little bit last week, but David Johnson going to Houston is interesting because David Johnson did have a pretty good season last year up until he got injured. I believe he sprained his ankle, and then the team traded for Kenyon Drake during that time. They had Chase Edmonds that they were playing around with a little bit as well. But then Kenyon Drake took over the job, and David Johnson never really got an opportunity to get it back. So a lot of people are down on David Johnson because of that trade with DeAndre Hopkins, kind of the negative press that it's gotten. and also the fact that David Johnson has kind of battled some injuries the last few years. But if he comes back healthy and for some reason regains some of the form that he had as the explosive running back in Arizona, it could be a good situation for him. I imagine that his stock is dropping. I can see him maybe falling into like the 5th to 8th round, somewhere around there in the fantasy football draft. So keep an eye out. Again, like if you have a solid running back core, he might be worth a flyer, but just understand that it's a boom-bust situation, much like Todd Gurley. But a lot of potential there. But then there's a lot of question marks too, like Duke Johnson. Is he going to stick around and still catch passes, be the PPR back there? So it's kind of a lot of question marks. But Kenyon Drake in Arizona, if you aren't already catching on to him at the end of last year, this guy's got a clear-cut opportunity to take over that backfield. Good opportunity for him. Make sure you look out for him as somebody that you can get high, because a lot of people don't necessarily know about him. He's probably going to be 3rd, 4th round still, I'd imagine. All right. Then the last major running back move is Jordan Howard went to Miami. And, man, Jordan Howard, he's got potential, but he's just always in the wrong situation, it feels like. Chicago, he got kind of pushed out of the system by Tariq Cohen. Then he goes to the Eagles, which is always a committee. And then he gets injured there. And then now he's in Miami, which is not a good O-line. I mean, they have addressed that in the offseason, but it's still like I don't see a lot of things drastically changing for him, and he's not really a very explosive pass-catching running back either. So I personally would stay away from Jordan Howard. Patrick Laird might actually be somebody I'd be more interested in, because he was actually emerged as a pretty good PPR threat down the stretch. And it's going to depend on kind of how their quarterback situation goes in the offseason, who they draft or whatnot. But I'm not very high on Jordan Howard. I think the bigger aspect of this move is that in Philadelphia, this pretty much signals that Miles Sanders is the guy. And he's going to have some competition, maybe with like Boston Scott, Corey Clement, things like that, depending on who they bring in. But it's clearly his backfield. And for the first time in a while, I would feel comfortable drafting Miles Sanders because he's not competing with the classic Eagles running back committee. Some other minor moves. I only got like 2 minutes left. But Washington signed Peyton Barber and J.D. McKissic. So I don't like Peyton Barber at all. I don't know why they picked him up over some of these other running backs that are still out on the market. But J.D. McKissic could be good because I think he could be a kind of a Chris Thompson, the poor man's Chris Thompson for them, and really could kind of emerge as their PPR back. I think that could be very useful for them as a waiver wire sleeper that you could pick up. Dion Lewis signed with the Giants. I think that, if anything, this is just going to affect Saquon Barkley in a negative. But this is like, I do not draft Dion Lewis at all, but I would honestly, I'm a little concerned about Saquon Barkley in this situation because Dion Lewis ties to the new Patriots, ex-Patriots coach, Joe Judge. Are they going to utilize him on pass-catching downs and not utilize Saquon as much? So it's just one of those like leech kind of moves that's just going to drain Saquon's value potentially. So I don't think it'll be that much, but just that's the thing I'm more worried about than anything in that move. Don't draft or don't even consider Dion Lewis. Sleeper move though. Kansas City signed DeAndre Washington, which DeAndre Washington has kind of generally been a backup his whole career, mostly with the Raiders. But when Josh Jacobs got injured end of last year, DeAndre Washington did have some good games where he stepped up. He's got some good talent, but just hasn't really had the opportunity. The Chiefs' backfield is not by any means locked down. Damian Williams kind of has the lead role on it, but he's kind of inconsistent, not always healthy. But so DeAndre Washington could be a good late-round flyer, somebody to keep an eye out who could really give you some huge value throughout the season. Just keep an eye out for that because that's going to be big. But keep in mind, they might also go the draft route too because I imagine LaShawn McCoy's not coming back for them. And then some other last minute that I've got left, some free agents that are still out in the market. Keep an eye out for some of the activities that happens with these guys because they've had productive careers before. Devontae Freeman, I talked about him. Lamar Miller, I would doubt he would get back to his strengths. He's coming off an ACL tear. LaShawn McCoy probably going to retire. Carlos Hyde, pretty productive last year. Frank Gore had his moments. I don't think he's going to retire, but again, good floor guy. Jonathan Williams had a few good games with the Colts. Corey Clement, some decent games with the Eagles. And then Chris Thompson. So just hypothetically speaking, Chris Thompson, if he ends up on the Tampa Bay Buccaneers or some team that could utilize this guy's speed, if he's healthy, huge value that you can get late draft or on waivers. So just keep an eye out for that as well. That's all I got. My phone's about to run out of available minutes. But if you got any questions or comments below, feel free to comment, and I'll try to answer it. So, cool. Well, thank you for watching. See you guys.